Hello and welcome to Top Story. US President George W. Bush says a new intelligence report on Iran that suggests it's not building nuclear weapons changes nothing. Iran was dangerous, he said, Iran is dangerous, and Iran will continue to be dangerous so long as it has the know-how to make a nuclear weapon. The conclusions of the US National Intelligence Estimate, most notably that Iran halted its nuclear weapons program in 2003, have had a seismic effect on the foreign policy debate in Washington, with many suggesting it could have a critical impact on the last year of the George Bush presidency and the campaign to replace him. Less certain, though, is the impact the report will have on the call for tougher UN sanctions against Iran. President Bush is not alone in arguing that the threat from Iran will remain so long as it continues to enrich uranium in defiance of UN resolutions. Well, joining me now to discuss the impact of the intelligence report on Bush's last year in office is Charles Cogan, an associate at the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at the Kennedy School, Harvard University, and a former chief of the CIA's Near East and Southeast Division. Thanks very much for being on Top Story. You served in the CIA for 37 years. In your opinion, what sort of an impact is a report like this likely to have on the last year of the Bush administration? What sort of a political bombshell is it?
Thank you for inviting me. I think it has an enormous effect. It is certainly going to lower the temperature, lower the pressure, remove the urgency about this conflict between, as Mr. Sarkozy put it, Iran having a bomb and Iran being bombed. There's a bit of back history here which I'd like to recount very briefly because it's important in the background to this report. At the end of the Gulf War, 1990-1991, it was discovered that Saddam's nuclear program was more advanced than the analysts of the intelligence community had thought, and therefore they went into a phase of overcompensation in the course of the 1990s, trying to, in essence, prove that that Saddam still was developing nuclear weapons. They ignored, for example, the assertion by Saddam's brother-in-law, Hussein Kamal, who told Ralph Aekius of the UN in Jordan that the Iraqi program had been abandoned in 1990, 1991. It's really sort of a parallel to what we see today. And then also the intelligence community was accused of being influenced by the White House and especially Mr. Cheney's office into admitting the existence of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which turned out after the invasion of Iraq to be false. So now we see, we have the situation where there was an earlier national intelligence estimate in 2005 which said that Iran was actively seeking a nuclear weapon. And here we have a new national intelligence estimate asked for by the head of the Democrats in the Senate,
so diametrically opposed to the previous one.
Diametrically opposed to the previous one. And therefore, according to the reasoning of the Deputy National Intelligence Director, Mr. Kerr, they couldn't leave the 2005 report hanging out there because it would be a deception for the American public, and they had to publish this.
So what conclusions do you draw from the big difference between the two reports? What on earth's going on?
Well, I'm struck by some of the language, the preambular language in this new report, which says we have a high degree of confidence, we have a moderate to high degree of confidence. I haven't seen that in previous reports, which indicates to me that this new information is probably very solid. I don't know where it comes from, whether it's technical information or information from human sources. But I think provisionally we have to rely on this information, and this is certainly a 180-degree turn from previous perceptions.
George W. Bush says it changes nothing, that the report is agnostic on Iran's nuclear weapons intentions. Do you think he's correct?
Well, I think President Bush is a very determined man. He is, I wouldn't go so far as to say that he has tunnel vision, but he likes to go straight on a certain policy and not deviate from it, and that is both his strength and his weakness. He doesn't like to deviate from what his fixed opinions are, and I think that's due to his faith, to his background, to his reformed former Playboy status. So you develop certitudes, and I think he has those certitudes, and I think he tends to be very stubborn, as many of his associates and observers say.
How much do you think he's going to be in control of the agenda, though, in this last year of his presidency, and the foreign policy agenda?
Well, I think he's more in control than people suspect. And, for example, we see this in the Annapolis meeting a few days ago. he very much is dependent on Condoleezza Rice and I think on Robert Gates, and these are people who have moderate views, pragmatic views, far different from the previous incarnation with Donald Rumsfeld and John Bolton and others, ideologues influencing the situation in Washington.
Well, you mentioned the ideologues there, John Bolton one, what about Cheney another, who seems to have been much quieter in recent weeks. Do you think now that the military option is going to be right off the agenda for this last year of the Bush presidency?
I think that the military option is reduced, certainly reduced. I think before this report, we always had in mind George Bush with his certitude saying that he would not tolerate an Iranian military program in the nuclear area, and you had to keep that in mind, and he likes to keep his word, and we were wary of what might happen. I think this does change it.
And what about the likely impact this is going to have on the electoral campaign? Do you think it will be used by the Democrats in particular?
Yes, I think it will. It's already being used, although he's not a Democrat. Senator Hagel has said that this should be a lesson for the ideologues in Washington who have claimed that with this overheated rhetoric that there's a possibility of World War III, of nuclear holocaust. I think this will change.
Part of the problem, I suppose, remains, and that is that Iran's intentions are so opaque. It's not clear what they're doing, and so long as they remain opaque, I suppose it's absolutely essential that the US and the UN keep their options open.
The Iranians have a national sport of trying to conceal their intentions. They even have a term for it in their philosophy, which is taqiyya. That is, dissimulation is a virtue when presented before an enemy who is more powerful. So they make a practice of deceiving outsiders to what their real policy is. For example, a couple of weeks ago, Rafsanjani said that nuclear problem could be negotiated. Ahmadinejad has said quite the opposite. Who's talking? Where's the real policy? They don't want us to know.
So it looks like all the options are going to remain on the table for at least for the last year of the presidency, briefly?
I wouldn't think the military option is still on the table.
Apart from the military option. Okay, thanks very much. That's all we have time for today. Thanks to our guest, Charles Cogan. Join us again tomorrow for another edition of Top Story. Goodbye for now.
Thank you very much.